So the way I would probably describe flood fill node is a node that is part of a set of, I believe it's like 5 or 6 nodes that can give you some much more needed variation inside of your texture sets. I wouldn't necessarily use it by itself, but it's more of a way to get a starting point to continue to create some really cool effects that will help you get some nice variation within your texture. Um, the only thing that you should know about a flood fill is the only way it can work is that if you have black and white values only. It doesn't really work well with grayscale values. So we definitely have to have something that has extremes of blacks and whites. And it works best on something that's tiling. So a really good candidate for it is essentially the tile sampler we've kind of been talking in the past video. So if we want to just bring a tile sampler in really quick, let's see. So we have a basic grid-like pattern that's definitely black and white. So let's just bring this down to a 5. And when we bring in a flood fill node, so let's just do flood fill, you'll notice we'll get this kind of weird looking map. Sometimes if you have the alpha on, you're going to start getting this kind of weird effect. Now, from here, this is, I mean, you can technically use this, but it's not going to give you the sort of effects that we're looking for because this is coming out as a color map. What you want to do is you want to be able to search through the flood fill, and we're going to have all these different nodes to play around with. My personal favorite is the flood fill to gradient and the flood fill to random grayscale. Kind of like we went over in the tile sampler video, you're able to get some nice variation in your height map with different random grayscales. But the one I kind of want to talk to you guys about is the flood fill to gradient. So if we plug this in really quick, you'll notice instantly we're getting these kind of almost gradient like patterns. We get this high peak of white going down to this black. And right now we're not seeing much, but let's just plug this in to our nodes and you'll notice in the 3D view the kind of effect we'll get. So what I love using this node in particular is for getting these nice kind of slants on different planes. So for example, say we just put this connection without the flood fill, you'll notice we're just going to have this basic kind of like, straight on effect, and we're not getting too much angle variation on the actual different squares themselves. So when we plug this in, we do get a little bit of slant, and this is really cool to get some nice variation on your surface. So right now we're only seeing it on one direction. So we're gonna have a bunch of different options to look at inside of the flood filter gradient. One really cool one to always mess with is the angle variation, and instantly you're kind of gonna see what we're getting. We're getting all these different gradients, but now we're getting them at different angles. So they're starting to be rotated randomly. And this is really cool to get some kind of nice rocky surface, or maybe even if you're thinking of making a sidewalk or something, we'll get some nice contours with the different planes. If you don't want it to be as intense, we can actually take a histogram, I believe range. I'm gonna plug this in, put this in here. And it's a little less intense and kind of more subtle. Let's go back in here. Just gonna scale this up a little bit just so you can kind of see the results. So right here, instead of having kind of this boring old, if we had like a kind of a tile floor, we have this, even this is just a little bit more interesting. We're getting some nice different kind of variations, almost like there's something growing underneath the tiles. And we're getting some really cool undulation within the actual material itself. One other big way that I use it a lot is when I'm creating kind of concrete or broken concrete. So to do that, kind of the same effect, we're just going to bring in the cells really quick. Gonna bring down the scale. We'll do an edge detect. And like I said previously, it has to be a texture or Yes, a texture that can be that has black and white values and is also tiling. So for example, this is going to work perfectly. So if we just bring in another flood fill, let's duplicate this set of nodes, bring this in here. And well, first off, let's just show you what happens without the flood fill. So we get some nice cells. It looks like some cracking in like, I don't know, a concrete tile or something of that nature. But if we were to do the same kind of combination in nodes that we did on these tiles down here, you'll notice we'll start getting some really cool, almost like earthquake effect, which is really nice if you're trying to get some variation on your texture. But to counter that, I kind of want to go over how if this is broken, what we're going to see the kind of effect on the flood fill. So I'm just going to break the tiling on this super quickly. And by doing that, I'm just going to bring in, let's see, I'm just going to bring in a disk, scale it down a bit. And then we're going to blend this over this. So let's bring this. So right here, you're going to notice that there is no continuous line from these black and white like areas. So instantly this is kind of broken. So if we bring in another flood fill, right there, we're going to have this big problem, and it's going to give us a result that isn't necessarily what we want, and it gives us this huge error inside of our texture. So that's something to look out for when you're using the flood fill node. Some other ones that I really like to use are the random color and random grayscale. Again, it's kind of the same thing we did with the tile sampler when we were messing with the grayscale values. We can actually get a nice map that'll give us a variation of grayscale values, and the same thing goes with the random color. We can plug this in here. Flood fill color. Oh, let's do, I think it's flood fill random color. Yeah, there we go. We're gonna plug this in really quickly, and there we go. So this is really nice. You might be wondering what we would need this kind of clown map for. It's really nice when we're using vector warp maps, kind of how we described a little bit in the tile sampler video. It'll give us some nice variation when we're plugging in something like a grunge mask and we're trying to vector warp it through that. So that pretty much covers the settings for a flood fill and kind of the ways I'd like to use them. Since we're on the topic of vector warps, let's talk about the third node that I'd like to go over in the series, and that is the vector warp node.